Okay, we'll get started with the people join. So, okay, on behalf of Logitech, it is like I welcome um, uh, Srikanth Ramachandran. Sorry. So for the first B3 Inspiring Speaker program, and Srikanth is going to speak about his entrepreneurial journey in bringing the concepts to market. And to know about Srikanth, right? Srikanth is a group CEO of Moving Walls. Moving Walls is a Singapore-based company, and they are involved in advertising technology company, and that automates out-of-home advertising, buying, and selling, and measures. He also holds an engineering degree in electronics and communication from Madurai Kamraj University, and he is also an MBA from International Business from NTU Singapore. Also, it is like Srikanth also has a Promising Entrepreneur Award from Asia Pacific Entrepreneurial Awards, and also it is like his company Moving Walls was named as TIE 50 winner in Silicon Valley, which is like Moving Walls is a top 50 technology startup company in the world in 2017. And also, if you see, it is like Srikanth have already contributed to a lot of technical companies. Like he worked in IBM, and he also built Knowledge Dynamics, and he worked as a technology consultant in a lot of international companies, mainly on IBM, Satyam, Wipro, those kind of companies. And also it is like he was a director of board of biometrics. Also, if you see, it is like Srikanth have spoken a lot of big forums, and globally he had spoken in so many forums on so many topics. Mainly, if you see, he talked about data, and he talked about technology. He talked about entrepreneurship. Okay, so I welcome again Srikanth, and it's completely over to you. And just stop sharing, and you can share your presentation now.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Ram. And sometimes when you hear someone describe you, it is a little bit scary, and you wonder how much of it is true and how much of it is in your resume. But anyway, let me try and do justice to it. What I thought I would do, and I took it upon as a challenge, because I'm here to learn as much as I'm here to share. So there are a couple of things I did. I tried to read a little bit more on what you would do in your day-to-day life, and perhaps pick on something that is core to you, which is probably a Design 3.0 as a principle, and try and take that and then put my learning into it, or my own experience in this entrepreneurial journey. So let's see how it goes. So I've got to admit, I'm not a designer, so my very basic understanding of what a Design 3.0 would look like is, as a user, on the left, you see a remote which has got every bells and whistle that you can think of in terms of function and feature that goes into the design. And then you have somebody who's kind of put a tape over things that are not relevant to them, so that you focus only on a few buttons. And then you have on the right something like what Apple has done, which is minimalistic, but it meets the requirements of what a user would like to use a remote for. So when we look at this and when we say, where does it begin? And I believe even before we start talking about building a product, I think we need to kind of visualize the future. And I'm not sure how many people would like it when I say it, but I think the visualization of the future has already been done in Hollywood. You just need to spend more time watching movies, Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on, because you would find that everything that you needed to know, it's already there. And that's really how we looked at it. I mean, the iconic film Blade Runners in the 80s or 90s when Blade Runner was released was really iconic. And I spent about 2 years in Japan around that time in the mid 90s. And Ridley Scott's inspiration came from certain areas in Japan, or specifically in Tokyo, like Shibuya and Shinjuku, where the buildings were being lit up, not only in terms of LED facade, but also in terms of LED screens, which could carry some content. So that was one of the vision that we visualized the future, and we said, hey, shouldn't there be connected screens? I mean, we were starting to see screens about 10 years back, which were in New York Times Square and Piccadilly Circus, and even in Asia, we started seeing screens in Singapore, Malaysia, etc., Thailand. And we said, what if these screens become connected? So that's how we kind of visualized what we wanted to build as a product and as an organization. Obviously, other movies helps you. Minority Report is a classic movie in terms of there's probably a 3-minute sequence when how a media would interact, and the movie was set from my memory in 2047 or 2052 or something like that. So it's literally another 30 years away in terms of how they visualized it. And when they visualized it, it was done 50 years later, what the world would look like. And if you read deeper into it, you would find that they hired about 12 to 15 scientists from the various schools like Harvard, Stanford, etc. And they brought them together to visualize the future. One thing I'm equally fascinated when I watch that movie is it's not what you see, it's also what you do not see, which is interesting. So what you do not see in the movie is the usage of a mobile phone, right? So I really wonder what it would become. And sometimes these are the questions that you could ask when you look at these movies. And there is one particular sequence in a movie called Focus, which I hope the streaming works. I'm going to play it for you because I found that to be, again, inspiring in terms of how a human mind can be influenced by what we see as we move around. And these have been our inspirations. But obviously, many people would ask me that this is not unique. It's already in the digital world because, it was already in the digital world. So the question was then to say, how do you make it happen in the real world? So the entire advertising and marketing industry, if you've seen Mad Men, the serial, moved away from being Mad Men to Math Men. They all became data scientists and they were looking for data. And suddenly the advertisers were asking the question, where is my money being spent? What is the return that I'm getting, and so on. So while the rest of the industry was becoming Math Men, we saw as a business an opportunity where the traditional world, where you see hoardings, billboards, whatever that you want to call it, were not getting automated, did not have the measurement. So we said, okay, this industry is still not automated. Why don't we take what we know about digital and then apply it to this offline industry? So that's really where the inspiration came from. I mean, if you want to visualize the future, sometimes you need something as an inspiration that you can see beyond the next 5, 10, 15 years that you want to be there. So definitely Netflix is a must. Obviously, reading books is the other. Reading books and watching movies provides you the inspiration. I'm going to play this and Ram, tell me if there is a problem. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that the video is playable.
How did you do that?
He once said, legendary gambler, he bets on everything, anything, huge cash bets all the time. Once the Bellagio put Bill Gates out of the high roller suite because Lee Wan was flying in. He is the perfect Vic.
How did you know who he was going to pick?
He told him to. Been telling him all day. From the moment he left his hotel room, we've been priming him, programming his subconscious. He's been seeing the number 55 all day long. On the elevator, lobby, even the stick pin on the doormat. Not only that, we loaded his route from the hotel to the stadium. He looks out the window, climbers are everywhere. Now he doesn't see it, but he does. There's no getting around it. He even sees far out. Suggestions are everywhere. The number of flowers in a vase.
That is genius.
And it's not only what he sees, it's what he hears. The Mandarin word for 5 is woo. There are 124 woo-woos in sympathy for the devil. Now he's not registering it, but it's all there. So when he picks up those binoculars, looks out on the field, sees a familiar face with the number 55 on his jersey, some little voice in the back of his mind says, that's it. And he thinks it's intuition, and he picks.
Yeah. So it's a very clever thought in terms of what is intuition, what is, in our subconscious mind when we make a decision. But assuming you have that inspiration, you've really found what you wanted to do. And this is, again, another movie that influenced me deeply, which was Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. Question is, how do you then start in the design thinking? How do you start building a product? So, in my business or in our business, we looked at it and we said, hey, this is fantastic. Now the question is, where do we start building this product? Now, you would have seen from my background that I don't come from the advertising industry necessarily, right? So I come from a technology engineering background and a data company that I had built, yes, e-commerce, a lot of technology work. But to build a product, especially into an industry, then you need to have industry knowledge. So good or bad, sometimes when people have, when they think they know everything about the industry, then you cannot innovate, because already there's a mind block that comes in that you know everything. Whereas we had to start this business and say, okay, we don't really know what the customer wants, but we know there is a need. There is a need that they are spending 60 billion globally and 20 billion in Asia, but they do not have an understanding of what they are getting in return. So that's really how we started looking at to build the product. Obviously, when you don't have the knowledge, what do? We actually found a customer, first customer, who was willing to pay us some little bit of money and worked with us collaboratively to build the product. So if the product development costs $1 million, the customer was willing to pay $1,000. But at least we took that as a proof point and we said, okay, why don't we start the first knowledge of what would they like to see? And many times, the interesting question is, after you go through all this process, then you start asking the question, who's the customer? Right? So many times that's even harder to unravel, because who you think is the customer may not end up being the real customer that you're building the product eventually to. Because I'm sure as a lot of product management people and a lot of business people, you're either a product company or a services company. And when the previous businesses that I had run, even though they were in a product company like IBM, I was not involved in the product development. I was involved in taking it to market. I was involved in customizing it. I was involved in delivering it. So the big question was, everyone you look at will look like a customer. So what I also want to do in this session is to make it a little bit interactive. I also want to make this presentation customer made and kind of involve you in the process. So I'm sure all of you have a phone. If you can just whip it out and join in Slido. So if you just scan the QR code, it would take you into slido.com. And I'm going to keep asking a few questions so that we can interact. Since it's a larger audience, I can at least look at an abstract way of what you're thinking about it. So it's a simple thing. Please let me know if you are able to participate, and I request you to participate. So the real question is then, who is the customer? And could be your boss because he's asking you to do a product, you go ahead and build it. Or in many cases, you would start having a product management team which has been dedicated and asked to kind of go look at this problem. But then you've got a sales and marketing team which is sometimes telling you who are the clients who are willing to pay money. So it becomes a little bit of a difficult a problem to solve. And there could be others. I may not have named them here, but broadly, when we started building the product, we had one customer who was willing to pay, but we had to create a small product management team, which was trying to say, fine, this customer is asking for it, but how many other customers will want it, right? Otherwise, if you remember, you will end up having a remote which has got 32 buttons because the client wanted every one of them there. So the question is, who is the customer that you're building for becomes a problem, unless you're able to kind of sort it out. And in a very balanced way, I think there is very clearly a winner, which is what I'm seeing out here, which is that the final user paying for it. But really the challenge is to find who that is, because you could easily get distracted with the first client who's willing to pay for it. And, if you read whether it is Steve Jobs, whether it is even Sony chairman, they're famous for saying that if I go and ask the customer what they want, then Sony wouldn't have built a Walkman. Apple wouldn't have built an iPhone. So sometimes having the customer driving the product management process can also be a challenging one. I mean, you may end up building something that is not future-proof because a customer can only express what they want based on, the current, present. But your vision may be a lot larger than that. So that's what we painfully found out through our personal experience as well, that just because there was a paying client, and if I compare that product that we built for the paying client and what we have now, I think it's dramatically different in terms of the features and functions and even the structure, even the pricing, all of that. But the core of what they wanted is still in the product management, is still in the product, right? So it was not way off that. But I think Apple is a very good example of that, where they didn't think of iPhone as a product. They looked at iPhone as part of an ecosystem, right? So when you start looking at it that way, then yes, you start looking at things that you would be otherwise blindsided if you just follow your client. So I think, yes, there is some value. And, even the 5% who have said, listen to the boss, I think please take that in, because, Steve Jobs is not known to be an easy person because, he has his quirks, but he had a vision and he did not insist on backing down. He kept at his vision. So sometimes I think it's a combination of all the inputs that you need to build when you start looking at a new initiative or the product, right? So kind of thank you for participating, and we'll continue on. And I hope that we would have more people participating as we go through this. Because at the end of the day, it is your time, it's your personal time. And I hope that we can make it a bit more interactive as we go through it. The second thing that has fascinated me as I've gone through this journey is a video clip of Simon Sinek, which I will not play here today, but it's very inspirational. And I suggest that you look it up on YouTube. It's called The Golden Circle. There are 3-minute versions and 15-minute versions of it. It's very inspiring because whether you build a product or you build a new initiative, not everybody would support you. And many times it's a lot of no's before you get the final yes. So you need to have a purpose that drives you as a human being when you start going down on this journey. More importantly, even if you're building a product for a customer, if you understand that customer's cost on why he would use the product, then you would find that the product that you start building is phenomenal. Let me take one of the examples that Simon Sinek talks about, which is very interesting. I mean, there are a couple of examples in the technology world. He talks about, let's say, Dell making MP3 players. So the question then was to say, hey, why is Dell making an MP3 players? Don't they make computers? Even though they made very good MP3 players, they could never succeed in that market. Whereas Apple came along and Apple created iPods and suddenly it became successful. Now, Apple is also a computer company, but they created iPods, but they did not talk about the features and functions of the iPod. They talk about the design, the aesthetics, the user experience, and how it fit into a larger ecosystem of content providers and users, right? So their purpose was very clearly a much higher than saying that I have 16 gig of RAM and I can store 10,000 files of music and I have 4 buttons for stopping, playing and pausing. Whereas Apple took a completely different view of it. Even in politics, he uses an example which is very interesting of Martin Luther King. So Martin Luther King fought for civil rights movement primarily for the Black community, but he did not come out in a speech, his famous speech, which kind of made everybody follow him. Incidentally, a lot of whites also followed him. He did not come out and say that Blacks are oppressed and Blacks need support. Whereas his tone was very different. He used the term called, I believe that all human beings are created equal. Now, if you believe that, then you join in the movement so that we can stop the suppression of any kind of human being. So in a way, if that purpose is a larger encompassing, what you will find is that when you have doubts in your mind, you would find that you are able to cut through the clutter and find some inspiration. So which is why when we looked at why we are doing this, we said, hey, 60 billion globally is getting spent on this media. Not only that, let's go to the core source of why. An advertiser is only interested in reaching people. Now, which media it is, whether he reaches on the mobile phone or he reaches it on a digital screen in an airport, is immaterial if we can follow the journey of that customer. So really focus was the inspiration to say it's the journey that we need to map and we need to reach people at the right location. Then, you define the how. How are you going to do it? Then you talk about a system, which is a measurement system. So we started building a patent for how we measure audience movement in the real world. And we filed for that patent and eventually we got that patent in the US. So then the how became that, I needed to have a measurement system. The second how is I need to have an automation system which can deliver the content. So we started building how we were going to, so in simple terms, the 3 hows that we kind of ended up settling down was measure, reach, and influence moving audiences. So really that was the how that we defined. If we can just focus on these 3 hows, then we can start building products which then start delivering on the how. Right? What then becomes a product? I have a SaaS product which is priced at $100 a month. I have a location intelligence product. I have small piece of hardware because if you saw Minority Report and others, there are camera sensors, there are Wi-Fi sensors or whatever. There are sensors which then build knowledge of what is happening in the location. So we actually ended up designing a hardware, even though we are a software company. We designed a small piece of IoT device because this was way back in 2015, 2016, where we could not find any equivalent hardware out there. Today, we don't design any more hardwares because the IoT industry is fairly well developed. So all we are focused on is running our firmware and our data collection modules on that. So the what can change. To some extent, the how may also change. But if the why is a little bit forward looking and you're able to capture that, not only for your own self, your team members, your clients, and your stakeholders, everybody starts focusing on why. So I think this has been one of my learnings as we went through this business. And I keep jokingly telling my team, I've watched this 10-minute clip at least about 200, 300 times. And I make it a point to keep watching it because I think we easily forget and we go back to our old habits. So this has been one learning that I've had through this process. So I just want to pause here and say, a simple question, right? I'm going to use a slightly different visualization technique for it. You must have come to this session, and I hope that for the rest of the session, I can try and address this. It's just free flowing. You can just type whatever you want. It would then look at, you could turn around and say, why? Because you were bored, because you're working from home, because you didn't have any work, whatever that you want to type, if you can join in Slido again and participate. It would be interesting to see how the visualization works. Oops. Okay, so jump in. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just going to create a visualization chart. Great. Curiosity is the beginning of design thinking. So I think you are on the right track. Learning, yes, is linked to curiosity. And yes, it is to get some a different perspective, perhaps, because I don't, necessarily, though I do come from the technology industry, probably the things that keeps you awake are not necessarily the things that keep me awake. Wonderful time pass. There are people who want to be an entrepreneur. That's also great. I see that you do have some internal competitions that you're trying to equip yourself to. And I believe this, I'm going to take the liberty. I think we do have a reasonable amount of Indian audience. So I'm going to assume that, philosophy and spirituality would automatically be following. But one thing I've learned through my journey is inspiration is something that's within. Yes, there are triggers, but the triggers are triggers, but the inspiration has to be found within, right? And especially if people want to be an entrepreneur, if they want to build something, I think it's very, very deep inside that you need to seek that inspiration. What you see outside can form it can expose a latent need, but eventually the inspiration has to come from inside. So I guess this kind of represents, if I broadly, put it into a few buckets. I think, like I said, design thinking is not my, my expertise, so to speak. Yes, I do apply design thinking as an entrepreneur who's building a product. I need to apply it, but it's not necessarily, I do have designers who design product, but as long as I feel, if you go back to the basic principle of saying, have an inspiration that's beyond the current product, then you start thinking about an ecosystem. I had this conversation with a friend of mine who was again working in Apple when the iPhone 3 came out, and he was telling me there are 20 other prototypes before this was made, and he said all of them are valid products that you may start seeing in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? So in a way, if you have visualized what the future ecosystem looks like, it becomes easy for you to then come down to the first product, and then you can start building the product around what you would like to see. Okay, which kind of brings it to the prototype of what my friend was saying. On a lighter note, yes, you could end up building a product itself, which finally blows up, or Batmobile is, another great example of a design of what a future product could look like. And every few years you get a refresh, and it looks way cool in terms of what the future of cars would look like. And they keep pushing the boundaries of what it should look like. Some of these are not necessarily working products, especially in the automotive industry. Now they've started creating prototypes of what the future car would look like. Those prototypes are very, very interesting to see how the future of cars would look like. So I think step 3, again, in a design thinking, is that if you've got the first 2 done right, if you've really built it based on listening to the customer, and you've got a visualization of what you wanted to do, then I think the 3rd step would be really you start building the prototype. Right. Again, I just want you to share an experience. I'm sure a lot of you have worked on products, have worked on even client solutions, etc. It would be interesting to see what is the kind of prototype that you have built that you feel that you did something wonderful, right? And it could be even in a sales kind of a situation where you created something that didn't exist before, right? You created a version of the product, or you created a version of a solution that the client did not necessarily have before, right? I'd love to hear your views on it. So if I go back and reflect on my own personal experiences, like I said, my history before I got into Moving Walls was around delivering products, customizing products, implementing products. Yes, there were many first of a kind, and one of the secure electronic transaction used to be in functional specs at that point in time in 95, 96, where there was no implementation of an e-commerce. And I don't know how many of you were working or were in college or whatever it is, or in school, and see paneer makhani Italian style. Wow, that's something I would love to try. But we went and implemented a secure electronic transaction end to end, from the browser all the way to the merchant, and to credit to the bank, and to the credit card processing. So the entire thing was built on a set 2.0, and we had to take alpha code from IBM and then build it. So it was something that I was very, very proud about, that we went and built the first prototype of what the e-commerce would look like. Subsequently, in Moving Walls, obviously, we've been building products, and like I said, it has been. Okay, I think somebody needs to go on mute.
So one more, Srikanth. Srikanth, can you go on mute? Yep. Yeah, done, Srikanth. You can continue.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So, when I say a prototype, it need not be a hardware, it need not be, but it's the first version of what you think you're going to be delivering. And even from my experience, this term called MVP, most viable product or whatever, I hated it with the first time I heard about it. And I said, why are you calling it as, that or whatever? But I think there is a value in an MVP, where you say, this is what the client wants. Then you're able to visualize it, you're able to share it with the clients, and then you're able to take it forward from there. So I think that's really what I've seen that has helped me through this process. The last, which is the hardest, I mean, we can talk about this for hours and days and we can never get it right, is this whole iteration, right? And I found this to be very, very useful, because every time, Agile as a term, we started adopting Agile as an organization almost 3 or 4 years back. And when we started, the obvious use of Agile was in development. So we could go and implement a system like Jira, have daily stand-ups, have 2-week sprints or 4-week sprints. We started with 4-week sprints, and we used to deliver a version of the product every 4 weeks. And but the real challenge was this, right? We were like right at the top, where somebody would say, I would deliver pieces, and as far as IT is concerned, it is delivered. But as far as the business user is concerned, it's not a product that he can use. So if you look at the top and the bottom, The bottom one says, even if you want to build a car, can you first deliver a wheels and perhaps even put a board on it so that the user can start using it? So it starts talking about something that the user can use. So every sprint then becomes something that the user can use. That means that your user has to be part of a sprint. Now, if the user is part of the sprint, and in our case, it became, let's say, a client or a marketing and salesperson who is saying that this is what my client wants and this is what they would pay for, then it becomes easier to say, how do you deliver that? So if I break Agile, and I'm sure a lot of you are, Agile proponents or Agile users, so I will not, elaborate it too much. But if I break it into 3 or 4 concepts that we have started adopting within the organization, the first thing we do is that every sprint, and we have defined our sprints to be 2 weeks each. In every sprint, we need to have something usable for the end user that gets delivered. Then the focus becomes on what is that usable feature function that gets incorporated into the platform. Even before we start doing it, when we start a new initiative, we have a concept of sprint zero. Sprint zero is nothing but assessing the market, looking at viability, looking at the users, how are we going to deliver it, etc., etc. So sometimes the sprint zero can be 4 weeks, sometimes it can be 6 weeks, depending on the complexity of whether we have a go or a no-go decision. So yes, there is an involvement of sprint zero, which is around how do we do this. And then we go into a sprint 1 onwards, where we try and keep a sprint cycle of 2 weeks. Obviously, there are daily stand-ups, which then become, we work on collaboration over documentation, which means that in a daily stand-up, everybody is able to then say, for that sprint of 2 weeks, what are they delivering today? What have they delivered yesterday? And what do they plan to deliver in the next few days of that sprint? So once we start breaking it down, we found that, our delivery cycle and our ability to deliver started increasing exponentially. Now, it's slightly different from a waterfall because what we call as a Scrum Master, some people would say it's a project manager, but I think the principle of Agile is very different. The principle of Agile starts from the person who is delivering the code or delivering the activity, making a commitment. So it rolls up from that level. What I would want to now do is, kind of ask you to share. I mean, we've got maybe another 10, 15 minutes where I can go talk about anything. So this allows you to ask anything that you want and even upvote any of the questions so that I can make it a little bit more personal if there are things that you had wanted to hear or learn or interact or engage. If I had missed that out, I'm happy to spend a bit more time on that. As a facilitator, yeah, please go ahead. I'll give you a minute so that I can have a little bit of water so you can type. Okay, maybe I'll start answering, and if you feel like adding more questions, please go ahead and ask. Let me take the easier one. I think there is not one, because I feel that you've got to take the best of what you see. So when you look at entrepreneurs, somebody like Steve Jobs is obviously an inspiration for building products which are way too cool. When I remember in 91, I was on the floor of Swiss Bank Corporation where they had trading terminals, and the trading terminals used to be Next computers then. And, for some of you, I don't even know if you remember what is called as a floppy disk. 91, floppy disk was still being used. And I saw with my own eyes the trader drag that floppy drive and put it into a dustbin, and out came the floppy drive. And I said, wow, that's cool. Whoever visualized it and implemented it in an operating system, that's really cool, right? So his design philosophies, his ability to think is amazing. But as an individual, he was not, from whatever little I know, he's not an inspiration for me. Whereas I would take somebody like perhaps Bill Gates as an inspiration at an individual level. Make all the money and donate the money, but not probably creating products, which he may not be the inspiration. So it's not one, but you could look at a few people for inspiration and then build your own collection of it. Biggest setback, I keep telling myself, this is what I also believe. The only setback is if you lose the battle in your mind, because many times you do not give the best that you are capable of because you think you will not achieve the success. I think as long as you can avoid it, come on, we are not gods. We will have setbacks. We will have problems. We will have things that, that we did not anticipate. It could be financial, it could be people, but you've got to keep moving on. So the idea is setbacks have to be part and parcel of the journey. As long as you don't lose it in your mind that, you cannot accomplish it, then you're fine, right? How do you handle failures? I mean, there are, let me share a personal experience of mine. We created a new product on the digital screen and we called it 15 Seconds of Fame. And we went out to a marketing awards function and we used to take photographs of the award winners and put them out on a very large screen in Kuala Lumpur and photograph that and send it to them as a gift to say, here is, you were seen on this large screen. And then coming Sunday, we are running it again, all the award winners on the screen. Please bring your family. Now, when we created this product, we didn't know whether we would succeed or not. We did it. And it was supposed to run 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. And on Sunday evening, because the person who was kind of managing this wanted to go home early, so at 8:30, he kind of moved it back to the normal content and he left for home. Unilever marketing head shows up at 8:45 in that location. And then she comes back and she says, listen, I went all the way and it was not there, right? You kind of didn't fulfill your promise. I'm taking such a simple thing. They didn't pay us money for it, but we had set an expectation that 6 to 9, these award winners would be shown on the screen. So we thought about it. And yes, my first thing was to say, how do we recover from this, right? The second thing was to say, listen, every failure is an opportunity to change and deliver a superior experience to the client. So we said, we apologize. I'll tell you what, here is the number of a limo driver, a Mercedes-Benz driver. He will pick you up any day of your choice from your home, drive you there, and you tell us when you're going, and we would interrupt everything to showcase your award-winning photograph right there. And we found that the client actually took her mother this time to go there, right? So every failure, you've got to spin it around and say, what do you need to do? Where the client would then say, you're responding and you're reacting and you're doing something, that touches them, right? And I've seen this with my own eyes in IBM. A friend of mine who used to work for IBM moved on to SAP, and IBM was implementing, and if I can use the example, Singapore Airlines SAP implementation, where they had paid about $15 million or $12 million of license to SAP and about $40 million to IBM to deliver the project. And the project was a total disaster. So the SAP guy walks into the meeting where SAP was supposed to be jettisoned and they were looking at a replacement. And he came out of the meeting room saying, another $15 million license deal done, right? So every failure that we think is a failure, if we stand back and look at it, I think you will find there's an opportunity to make some corrections. These are really hard questions, useful things to deliver every 2 weeks. I tell you, we keep hammering away at it. It's the hardest one to solve. Because if you go back to the previous slide that I was sharing with you, it becomes easier to just keep adding some features, but really usability of these in terms of how it impacts. Yes, there are scores that you do, rise scores, etc., to kind of prioritize where you think the feature should be, but it is yeah, I thought I was using Batman as an inspiration as well, Batmobile, but yes, Christopher Nolan is also another massive inspiration in terms of what the future should look like. But yes, it is a difficult one to find that 2 weeks window, but if you keep forcing yourself at it, you keep getting better and better at it. I mean, that's really what I've learned in my journey as an entrepreneur. I keep saying, I wish I knew what I know now. I knew this about a year back or 2 years back. And sometimes you're not perfect. So you'll continue to find you have to learn. You'll continue to find that you have to keep applying. And as long as you're getting better than where you were 2 weeks back or 4 weeks back or 8 weeks back or 6 months back, I think that's really the journey that gives you the satisfaction. And how to convince customers to give you a try before rejecting? I think, again, it's not an easy answer, right? So sometimes it's really the customer mapping of who you want becomes the hardest one, because you will find customers who pay you a lot of money, but they demand the product to go in a certain direction. That may or may not necessarily be what 100 other customers want who may not be paying you today, but 100 times what they would pay you will easily surpass what the single client is doing. So I think there's no right and wrong answers. You need to have some marquee names on board for customers to start believing that your product is real. But at the same time, you've got to figure out which is that customer segment that's going to give you the biggest. So from our perspective, if I look back, yes, we are a Unilever foundry. We've got multiple awards, etc. But really, the customer segment that has worked out for us is really the Netflix, the Spotify, the digital clients, the Food Panda of the world, who are really our customers. Now we have started doing what they want because they are a lot more nimble, and we find that the product direction is really shaped by this customer segment more than the traditional banks, the telcos, and the traditional giants, right? So we found that over a period of time, initially we wanted the marquee name, so we went after it. Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of it, like I said, has got to be some personal inspiration. So these are questions. I know it is being recorded, but please don't show it to my wife, because these are questions my wife asked me even today, to say that if you had stayed in IBM and I was, reporting into the board of IBM Japan, I could have made a lot more money than I've made as an entrepreneur. But I think I wake up with a sense of fulfillment that I had a vision, I had a dream, and I was able to chase it, and I was able to bring it to fulfillment. So what I find is, in general, even the Chinese have a very famous saying which says that if money can solve a problem, then it's no longer a problem, right? So in that, if you think that money is the answer, then we all know that there are many problems in our life that cannot be solved by money, because we want a feeling of satisfaction, we want growth, we want the ability to express ourselves, we want to create something. And sometimes if money becomes the only objective, then it doesn't get you there. So you need to have something larger as a vision, which is the why that you need to work out for yourself. And once you've worked out that why, every time when there's a failure, when there's a trouble client, when there is a problem, when there is a setback, you're able to then go back to that source and say, this is the reason I'm in the I'm doing what I'm doing, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're an entrepreneur within the company. In fact, I should have shared that in IBM, I never worked on traditional products. The simple rule in IBM was the 3-4 years I spent, or 8 years I spent with them. Every year, I was given a new technology to work on. If it succeeded, or if it promised to succeed, I would be given another year. If it succeeded, it would be taken away from me, because they said I'm not the kind who could run large businesses. I was the kind who could create, innovate. So even in large organizations, depending on what your source of joy is, you need to align your job to it, right? So the useful thing I've done is something called as the Strengths Finder. Yes, there is a paid version called Strengths Finder 2.0. There is also a free version of Strengths Finder that you can do. And immediately it gives you an indication of where your strengths are. And if you can apply yourself to those strengths, then I think you would find that you are at an equilibrium of happiness. Now, you may succeed, you may not fail, but at least you're doing things that strengthen you. So I think those are things that I've learned through this journey. Strengths is definitely important for your personal grounding, because then you would actually enjoy. And there are some beautiful examples, and I'm sorry to continue on this, but there are some beautiful examples on strengths where, let's say you're operations head and you would be brilliant at it. Everybody would say, this person is the best operations manager I've seen, or the best scrum master, or the best project manager. But at the end of the day, the person will go back home and say, I do not have any energy. I'm, de-energized. I hate my job. But when you go and talk to your manager, the manager would tell you, you're doing so well. I'm going to give you a promotion. I'm going to give you an increment. I'm going to make you a senior project manager. What is your problem? Now, the problem is, you may be very good at it because you have a strength, which is that anything that you start, you will not stop till it gets done well, right? But per se, following up with people, working with people, etc., may not energize you. So you are in a conflict because you have a strong strength of getting things done. You will get things done, but you will find that you are unhappy even though you've got things done. So I think that's really the trick, that whether in corporate or in entrepreneurship, if you can figure out your strengths, and again, like Kannadasan, I know some of you may not speak Tamil, and I'll translate it, and many religions and many spiritual things. Ni unnai arindal ni ulagathai aalalam. So in a way, it's about discovering you eventually of what you're good at, which will keep you through all the hardship. Nothing else will keep you through that. And I hope I'm making sense. Okay, I think I've taken close to an hour of your time. If I can hand it back to Ram, is there anything else that I've missed? If you could.
Yeah, thank you so much, Srikanth. So, Balaji, do you want to add something?
No, it was wonderful. I think thanks, Srikanth. That was very good. It was very, I would say, very personal, and you shared your kind of realistic experiences. So I loved it. I hope everybody else also loved that sharing of the experience. And thank you very much for the time that you invested in us. So hope we will definitely make use of it. And I think you rounded it off very well with Kannadasan. If you realize yourself, we can rule the world.
Right. No, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much. And, my email is right there. I'm happy to have conversations. If there's, one thing I've realized is every interaction is something that you learn through the process. I'm happy to have any interactions, even at a personal level. If you want some, I won't call it advice. If you want to sound off some ideas, anyone here, feel free to approach me either through email or LinkedIn. I'm happy to respond.
Thank you so much, Srikanth, for your valuable time. Okay, definitely we'll be reaching out to you. Okay, thank you so much, guys, for attending this meeting.
Okay, thanks, Srikanth and team, and thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Srikanth.
Bye.
Bye.